All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started because we want to make sure that we use all the time that we've got today. So again, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this webinar. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Christine Moody. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and lead on our post-secondary education and employment initiatives here at the UCLA Tarjan Center. The UCLA Tarjan Center is a federally designated university center for excellence in developmental disabilities, or UCED, and your host for today's webinar. This webinar is part of our Access series, which aims to advance college's capacity for equitable student success among students with developmental disabilities. Put this slide up now. All right. So support for the Access webinar series comes from a contract with the California Community College Chancellor's Office to provide training and technical assistance to the community college system, DSPS offices, and college to career programs. Before we transition to the talk, I have a few logistical items to go over with you. We will be recording the webinar and it will be available for later viewing on our website. Throughout the webinar, all participants will be muted, but we invite you to put your questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom. That's on the bottom of the Zoom toolbar, and there should be a Q&A button. We will try to get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. For those of you that would like captioning, I'll go ahead and put that stream text captioning link in the chat one more time. And you can click on that link and it'll bring you to live captioning. All right. So getting it to today's talk. So today's webinar will provide an introduction to educational coaching, an emerging practice with growing data indicating that it may enhance the persistence and success of college students with developmental disabilities, including autism and intellectual disability. Within the California Community College system, educational coaching has been used successfully with autistic students and students with intellectual disability in the college to career programs, which are available at 8 colleges across the state within the California Community College system. We are also, and we're joined by 2 college to career program representatives today, and we're also excited to have the California Community College Chancellor's Office with us today. And the Chancellor's Office has designated educational coaching as an allowable expense within the broader Disabled Students Programs and Services, DSPS funding. So that really paves the way for expanded availability, hopefully, of this support service in the future. And that's what we're getting into today. Before we fully dive into the presentation, I'll introduce the speakers. So we have Mia Keeley, who's here joining us from the California Community College Chancellor's Office. She started at the Chancellor's Office in 2013 and has held various positions across divisions over 20 years, with over 20 years of experience as an educator. She most currently serves as the Dean in Educational Services and Support, overseeing multiple programs. We also have Jennifer Tabb, or Jenny, who's also representing the California Community College Chancellor's Office with us today. She's joined the Educational Service and Support Division at the California Community College Chancellor's Office in February 2023, so just earlier this year, and is responsible for the Disabled Student Program and Services, DSPS office. Jennifer has experience working closely with students with disabilities, implementing universal design for learning and differentiated learning, and providing professional development to educators. We're also joined by April Fante, who serves as the program manager for disability support services at North Orange Continuing Education, NOCE. She has over 20 years of experience in post-secondary education, having served as a DSS instructor, counselor, curriculum writer, as well as developing and managing grant-funded programs and services, including their college to career program. We also have Rachel Martinez here with us. Rachel is the program coordinator and counselor for the college to career program at the San Diego Community College District. She's also served as a vocational specialist and also worked within the workability program in San Diego Community College District, as well as Southwestern College. So thank you to all of our guest speakers today. And I'll also be contributing to the presentation today. And I'm excited to get us started. Actually, I'm going to be kicking us off with some background. All right. So let's dive into it. Okay, so I assume that many of you here have some knowledge of autism and intellectual disability since you chose to be here. But we also want to make sure that we all have the same kind of foundational understanding of not only these diagnoses, but their impacts and what this means for young people as they approach college. So both autism and intellectual disability are considered neurodevelopmental disorders, which is a group of diagnoses that are defined by the presence of neurobiological differences starting at young ages. And those differences impact how the person behaves, processes information, how they interact with the world. Autism specifically is characterized by two broad categories of symptoms. So social communication differences, which include things like difficulty using and understanding nonverbal communication, like tone of voice or body language, challenges with perspective taking, difficulty establishing and maintaining back and forth conversations. And then the second big category is restricted or repetitive behaviors or interests, which include things like repetitive movements, which we know many autistic people use for coping with big feelings, highly specific interests that they approach with a lot of passion, also things like repetitive speech or routines and sensory differences. Including, mixed profiles of people who are highly sensitive to sensory input, as well as having lower sensitivity to certain sensory inputs. Intellectual disability, on the other hand, is defined by an individual who has below average cognitive abilities, as well as below average adaptive living skills. So those adaptive living skills are things like communication, personal care, like hygiene, safety, cooking, cleaning, being on track with appointments, transportation. Unfortunately, both autistic people and people with intellectual disability are more likely to experience a number of challenges, even outside of these diagnostic criteria areas. This includes social rejection, isolation, mental health difficulties, difficulties with executive functioning, difficulties with living independently, difficulties with obtaining employment. So despite all those challenges, we also need to make sure that we're approaching our work through a neurodiversity affirming lens. And I want to start by just mentioning that I'm going to be using primarily identity first language today, and that means referring to autistic people using the term autistic people rather than people with autism. And I do that out of the coming from the neurodiversity movement and the voices of self-advocates, particularly of autistic self-advocates who express a preference for that language terminology. I will say, of course, everyone has individual preferences and there are differences within the autistic community. But right now, there's some data that kind of indicates that might be the preferred term among the majority of autistic people. So that's, I'm going to be just giving that caveat there. And so within the neurodiversity movement what grew out of that, it also acknowledges that although some of those challenges that I mentioned may stem from the neurobiological differences, so things like executive functioning, there are also many other challenges that actually stem more from the societal environment, where differences are not always met with acceptance. For autistic youth, we actually see that those who have more social communication differences are more likely to be lonely, and that loneliness then leads to those mental health difficulties like anxiety and depression. Some workplaces, maybe are not open to accommodations or training like using individualized methods like providing more clear or concrete instruction that would enable neurodivergent employees to succeed. So that framework really aligns with what's called the social model of disability, that disability arises from the environment not being set up for success and inclusion of people who don't conform to kind of the norms. So this neurodiversity movement has gained momentum, arguing and advocating that differences be celebrated, normalized, and that really diversity, including neurodiversity, confers benefits that helps and promotes positivity in communities and across different contexts. And although there's been a historical pattern of exclusion or separation, more and more we see that the concepts of the neurodiversity movement have come to fruition. Inclusive education and inclusion in the workforce does indeed produce benefits for students and employees, both of those with the disability as well as those without disabilities. Things like reducing biases, increasing feelings of safety, workplace morale. And it's also essential to kind of see the strengths within an individual. And unfortunately, the medical model often frames these diagnostic groups in the context of their symptoms or challenges, but doesn't always highlight the strengths that can come from this too. So a restricted interest for an autistic person can really grow into expertise that's invaluable to their work or to their education and pursuing classes. For some, sensory differences can be associated with kind of a greater ability to kind of pick up on details or patterns that can really aid them in music or in technical work. Every individual has specific strengths, skills, and passions that they bring. So moving into why we're here today, we know that due to advocacy, legislation, awareness, students with intellectual disability and autistic students represent a growing number of students in the college population. And in the case of autism in particular, the prevalence of autism has gradually increased over time. In 2004, 20 years ago, we saw about 1 in 125 as the prevalence, and that is now 1 in 36 children. And so those estimates are for 8-year-old children specifically. So colleges are seeing an increase already, but that is only going to continue to grow. That estimate, the estimate in 2012, which would correspond to people who are college age now, was 1 in 69. And so in the next 10, 20 years, as those children in the more recent estimates grow, this is only going to increase. So that means that colleges need to continue to build their knowledge in these populations and learn how to best support them in the classroom. And before we get into educational coaching, I want to set the stage for why college is important. So all of these stats here on this slide are compared to broader national samples of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So the data tells us that students with developmental disabilities who attend college are more likely to achieve competitive integrated employment, which means paid work in the community alongside people without disabilities. They show greater independence. They need fewer supports at work and in daily living. They work more hours. They receive better wages. They're more socially connected. They feel more confident to date. They have greater physical health. All of these benefits are so powerful for anyone, really, but especially for students with developmental disabilities who often struggle in that transition to adulthood. And more on a societal level, we similarly see data that inclusive college settings result in improved attitudes and reduced stigma towards those with intellectual and developmental disabilities among the broader college student population and instructors. So hopefully that got you all fired up about the benefits. But what are those roadblocks that we face? We know that students with developmental disabilities struggle in the transition, like I mentioned, around the time they exit the high school system. There's a big shift in their environment and in society's expectations as well. They lose routine, familiar peers, familiar teachers. Many lose access to services, the services that they received in high school, but also just because there are fewer services for adults with autism or intellectual disability. And the academic environment from high school to college becomes less structured, more independent. And these unique challenges put them at higher risk for academic challenges, dropping out, or mental health in college. And so from one of our educational coaches at Shasta College, here's a quote: "The challenge I have noticed is that non-DSPS staff and faculty don't know how to accommodate our students with autism or intellectual disability, speak to them, or show empathy and understanding. They're expected to just know things because they're in college, but they don't. For a lot of students, this is their first time really learning what works for them academically on their own." So what are we doing to support these students now? So these are the top 5 services and accommodations received by students with intellectual disability and autistic students per research. So these accommodations are grounded in ADA 504 Title V requirements. So extended time, quiet testing location, note-taking, preferential seating, and being able to have spelling or grammar check. But we need to think about the historical context in which those laws, ADA 504, Title V, were developed, and the students that were really in mind at that time. And neurodivergent students and students with intellectual disability were just quite simply not at the forefront when those laws were developed. But colleges are serving those students more and more. And if our understanding of the diversity of needs to access the educational curriculum has expanded beyond just extended time, and first-person perspectives of college students with autism and intellectual disability in research, qualitative research, call out how the supports they receive do not always adequately address their sensory needs, their social needs, emotional needs, academic needs, and community needs within the college setting that would really enable them to access their education and promote success. All right, I promise I'm going to transition to another speaker soon. We've got just a couple more slides of background. So that brings us to educational coaching. So educational coaching is an emerging practice. And so there's several studies from across the country, really, looking into this practice. And they call it different things sometimes. So sometimes it's peer mentoring, sometimes it's called academic coaching, but it shares a lot of similar elements. And we'll go in depth with you about education, the college to careers concept of educational coaching and how it's been utilized. But more and more, the research, this recent research, is showing that students really value educational coaching when it's available. Autistic students and students with intellectual disability view it as the most helpful support service that they receive from DSPS when it is available. And the one that they would not give up if they had to just keep one. And so definitely see it as tied to student success, and we're excited to talk more about it today. All right, so I'm going to transition to April now.
All right, so I'm going to be going into like, what is an educational coach and what is that an educational actually does. So right now, let's see, an educational coach, we want to make sure people understand it's not an academic tutor. We usually use other resources on our college campus for academic tutoring. So an ed coach does not specialize in a particular subject, however, provides academic guidance and additional support to students, including self-advocacy, accessing campus resources, developing natural supports, guidance in time management, organization, and study skills. And the level of support that a student may need may be very different. For example, some students may need educational support for a semester or two until they develop some natural supports and learning how to maneuver the college campus and successfully start passing their classes. And they find themselves not needing an educational coach. If they come back, they may hit a really difficult class, such as math, and English, and what's another one that they struggle with? I think the writing classes, to where we've even started to develop some workshops on helping students with their writing skills. Okay, so what does an ed coach do? So at the beginning of each semester, an educational coach is given a caseload of students, and they coordinate their ed coaching sessions with their students' availability. And then students meet with the same ed coach consistently at least 1 to 2 times a week for an hour, depending on the number of classes they may be taken and the level of support each student may need. Students meet with their ed coaches one-on-one or in a small group setting, especially if they tend to be taking the same classes. Let's see, prior to the pandemic, ed coaching was completely on campus. So when 2020 came, we needed to learn how we're going to revamp it to go remote. And through this process, it actually turned out to be really successful. We were able to reach more students, and it did require a lot more training for people that may not be so familiar with Zoom. But that all came along through the pandemic, and students learned to master those skills, which was pretty impressive. So now as we're coming out of the pandemic, well, we are out of the pandemic, and we want to bring ed coaching back to campus. And so that's something, we're not going to remove the remote ed coaching, because we found like ed coaches can provide more support to more students when it's remote. And then we're going to bring back ed coaching for those students that do have certain disabilities, such as visual impairments, physical limitations, to where we want to be able to provide on-campus support for them. Okay, so Rachel and I we're going to go deeper into each of these areas that ed coaches support, including staying organized in their classes and assisting with higher level executive functioning, with planning, reasoning, problem solving, and fluid intelligence. Ed coaches teach students different study skills, stress management, how to self-advocate for students among instructors throughout the college system, as well as building their communication and social skills, and how to access the campus resources that our students are completely overwhelmed with. And I would say, even for myself personally, I was overwhelmed with. Right, when students first meet with their ed coach, they teach them how to stay organized by going through their syllabus and scheduling out their assignments for the semester to assist students in not getting stressed out. So then they would just go through their syllabus, help them to do their time management, teach them how to create a to-do list, how to mark things out on their calendar, so that they would have a visual idea, which is really effective with a lot of our students, to acquire these skills and also continue to utilize them, whether they're with an ed coach or not. And we just see these skills just carry over beautifully. All right, so in the areas for executive functioning, so these students tend to need support in prioritizing and breaking down tasks. We meet with them to strategize on how to prioritize and break down the tasks, how to strategize to reduce the distraction and create productivity. So that may look like speaking with the student, and if they're not in a distraction-free area, where else can they go? Perhaps going to the learning center if there's too much going on at home and you need to get away. And then we just strategize with them to create the opportunities to provide the space that they need to be successful. Then we also go into helping them to set goals and hold them accountable, along with problem solving as things come up throughout the term. All right, and then study skills. We have the ed coaches assist students with taking tests by teaching them different skills, such as creating flashcards or unique memorizing techniques to help students remember vocabulary or different parts of history. That's kind of a difficult class, is history and memorizing the people and exactly what they've done. So there's just a lot of different techniques and skills our ed coaches can provide to students that also carry over to where, you know, again, not all students need an ed coach for every semester. They may need it for one. Some students just start off with an ed coach depending on the level of support that they need, and then we'll drop ed coaching. And then if they come across a difficult class, they'll reach out for ed coaching. And then you do have those students who do need that support each semester, but it tends to be less, and you could tell that the students are gaining the skills that they're being taught with all the sessions that they attend. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Rachel.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about more of the social, emotional aspects of what our educational coaches help with, one of them being stress management. As you can imagine, coming from high school to college, it's a big transition that can cause a lot of stress for our students, especially our students with autism. We're also seeing an increase in mental health diagnosis combined with their autism diagnosis as well. So this is an important aspect for us to cover in ed coaching. So sometimes our ed coaches will start the session with a mindfulness, a brief mindfulness meditation, whatever that looks like, just to kind of help the student to be grounded and to get the most out of the session as they can in terms of productivity. Also, we will work in some movement if needed. If the student is feeling overwhelmed, it looks like maybe they need a break. We encourage the student to maybe step outside, get some fresh air, maybe take a walk around the campus and come back to the task at hand, maybe take a stretch break, whatever that looks like for the student. Also, positive self-talk and encouragement, right? A lot of our students are, getting messages in K through 12 of, kind of their limiting aspects, right? So we're trying to help students to build their confidence through positive self-talk and also encouraging them throughout their various challenges and situations that they deal with. Self-advocacy is also a big one, as our students are learning what it means and what it looks like to be an adult in college and all the expectations and responsibilities that come with that. One of them being communication with instructors. Maybe there's an issue that comes up our student needs help with, and they don't know how to ask for help. And so we can help students to develop those professional emails to be clear about what they need. We can even have ed coaches attend office hours with our students to communicate their needs to instructor that way as well. And communicating needs, to ed coaches too, right? It's not easy. Some students may not know how to express that. So we're helping the student to practice that. Determining interest and career planning. So that's something that we're talking about constantly with our students, helping them to understand their interests as it relates to a job and kind of planning the next steps in their career path. Lastly, self-awareness and empowerment. So our students are really getting to know themselves a lot more as an adult in college, and we're able to help them understand better their strengths and their weaknesses and empowering them towards success. Regarding social skills, there's a lot more new interactions that the student will deal with instructors, with new peers, new service providers in college. And so it's a big wide world for them to navigate in this area. So We do a lot of social skill development with students. Maybe we help them role play a tough conversation with their instructor, a tough conversation with their classmate. Maybe they want to make a friend, right, in class. Maybe they want someone to share notes with. And so we're helping them role play those situations to facilitate success in that area. Also in group settings, if we have student events, which we like to do in C2C, help with community building and whatnot, we do have ed coaches there to facilitate conversations. So, asking questions, helping the students form connections with each other, showing, common interests and things like that to help them grow in that area. Social coaching and problem solving. In college, problems come up, right? Maybe problems with peers, what have you. We are kind of coaching them through that and helping them to figure out what the best path of action is to get the best result. Also accessing resources. There's so many things to navigate. As many of you probably understand, especially for students coming through the K-12 system. So it's a lot. It can be very overwhelming. So our ed coaches are able to provide one-on-one training on Canvas, accessing things like their portal, also other resources such as YouTube or Khan Academy to help to facilitate learning, maybe beyond what the instructor would provide. Also awareness of campus resources. Us at C2C, we like to call ourselves the college concierge, right? We're kind of that go-to person that the student can go to kind of figure things out. Where do I go for this? Where do I go for that? I need help with this, I need help with that, and kind of help make that connection for the student so it's not so overwhelming for them. We also realize that we're not the experts in many areas, right? So referral to services is a huge aspect of what our ed coaches can help with. If a mental health crisis is coming up or some kind of issue, we're not the therapists, right? So we are making that kind of warm handoff connection for students to these resources and basic needs as well.
All right, I'm going to take back the microphone here. So we've mentioned college to career several times, and some of you may be already familiar with this program. But I want to kind of go into depth here or provide a little bit of overview, and then we'll show some of the data that we've collected in the college to career programs. So the college to career programs, there's 8, as I mentioned earlier, across the state. They're funded by the Department of Rehabilitation, but are embedded within the 8 community college campuses and further supported by the Chancellor's office, as well as us here at the UCLA Tarjan Center. So we've got North Orange and San Diego here with us. Those are 2 of the 8 programs. But there's also programs in Alameda, Fresno City, Sac City, Santa Rosa, Shasta, and West LA. The typical structure is about a 3-year program for students with intellectual disability and/or autism, with the focus being on certificate completion and transition to competitive integrated employment. All students in the college to career programs receive educational coaching as well as job development services to support that transition to employment. So here are some of the data on student success in the college to career C2C program. So this data was collected in 2020 to 2021 on 282 college to career students across 8 campuses. So, different years in the program. And in that year, C2C students took 996 inclusive classes, meaning classes with, their peers without disabilities, and as well as additional basic skills, DSPS classes, and C2C specific courses. In their courses, they had an 89% pass rate. So a really, really high pass rate and really impressive, especially given some of that data I presented earlier, showing that oftentimes these students can struggle in college. And this actually compares to a 70% pass rate in the full California community college system for the full population, general population, for that same year. And so with these supports, autistic students and students with intellectual disability are really achieving success in their classes. We also, in that same year, had data on 82 students who were kind of graduating or exiting this C2C system, and 59 exited with competitive integrated employment or transfer to a 4-year program. So I know that 59%, of course, it's not 100%. It's not, there's room to grow, room to expand. But I also want to put those numbers in context. So in California, the regional center serves individuals with autism and intellectual disability, as well as other developmental disabilities. And the rate of employment in competitive integrated employment in the regional center system is 13 to 17%. So that is quite a bit lower than this 59%. So we're really, really proud of that. I'll also compare it to the general population of college students in the US. In a very, very large scale study of thousands and thousands of college students at graduation or exit from their college program, about 50% have full-time employment. And so, not everyone has a job right when they exit college, and many get jobs in the months after as they continue to search. So that's something, just want to hold that in mind. That 59% could be part-time or full-time employment, but it is meaningful paid employment in their career field of interest. So we're really proud of that. I'm going to pass it to April, who's going to talk a little bit more about North Orange, who's been able to implement ed coaching both in C2C, but also outside of the college to career program.
Yeah, so when we saw the great success our C2C students were having in the program and it being limited to students with an intellectual disability and all these and a few other requirements for C2C, we wanted to provide this opportunity for other students that we knew would benefit. And so we started our ed coaching through college to career in 2011. And with that tremendous success with those students, we partnered with Regional Center and we created a Taylor Day service. That's what they call their Taylor Day service, but we call it IVES, which stands for Independence, Vocational, and Educational Supports. Those are the 3 areas that IVES will focus on with students, and who qualifies for IVES are those with Regional Center. So again, it's a section of certain people that qualify under C2C. You qualify under ID, autism, and the desire to get a job in a couple years. And so how do we keep expanding and meeting the needs of more students with disabilities that weren't falling in line with these other programs? So we worked with our student success SEEP team, and we call it equity. And so for 2 years, starting in the pandemic, actually, we did not know the pandemic was about to hit. We were going to launch this in spring of 2020. But then like the program wasn't even set up to go remote. Again, we were all in person. But again, like we were able to provide this additional service to students who under equity, as long as you were in the non-credit inclusive classes, you were able to be provided ed coaching support as well. And so that's how we started to expand our ed coaching program. And just to go over the data I have here. So I just shared the data from 2019 to 2023. And remember, this was during a pandemic where ed coaching was completely on campus and we developed the program online. And so we averaged over those years an average of 71 students, an average of 23 inclusive classes. And in total, there was 495 classes, whether it's pass, no pass, measurable progress. Measurable progress was usually like individuals in a typing class where they re-enroll until they meet that required words per minute that's required for that program. So that's why we call it measurable progress, because it might take them a few times to pass. So out of the 495 classes, 415 classes were passed throughout the pandemic. And then the next slide, I'll just show you the success rate during this time. So in 2019, we were over 80%. 2020, we fell under. That's, due to the pandemic. But then come 2021, we are still growing with success. 2022, we're close to 95. Okay, and then this is just a snapshot of our educational coaching just for this last year, 2022, 2023. So we had 109 classes taken, and that was Cypress College, Fullerton College, and North Orange Continuing Education. We're able to provide ed coaching to those students. And so they passed with 92% success rate. And just comparing it to the average student attending like Cypress at 84.7% and Fullerton College at 67.8%, our students are passing at higher rates, to where I wouldn't doubt ed coaching could help all students, but here we're just focusing on students with disabilities because they need this additional support to move forward in their vocational and educational goals.
Okay, so together in partnership with the Tarjan Center, both the San Diego Community College District and North Orange Continuing Ed C2C programs developed an assessment tool. And kind of two motivations behind this assessment was, number one, we wanted a way to evaluate our ed coaches as far as their performance. And then also we wanted to hear from our students, how did they think educational coaching was benefiting them? So we assessed for how their ed coach helped them and their level of satisfaction with ed coaching service. And this is what we came up with as far as the results and what students thought. They thought it was most helpful with checking in on assignments, helping them with focusing on assignments, and then lastly, using websites to find information. This was kind of a tie for third, using websites to find information. So resources like YouTube, Khan Academy, as I mentioned earlier, and understanding instructions. Sometimes professors will put out a assignment detail, and it can be very confusing even for ed coaches at times. So we're kind of helping them break that down and get the best score possible on those assignments. And regarding our student satisfaction with ed coaching, this is the result of that. And students on average reporting being very happy with the support they receive by the ed coach, rating this item's 4.77 out of 5 stars. So that's a really, an awesome result for us that we're very happy with. And not only are our students benefiting from ed coaching, but I would say our ed coaches are also benefiting from ed coaching. One of our ed coaches says, as ed coaches, we get to see students grow over time and we get to be a part of their progressing. I compare it to students going from a caterpillar to a beautiful butterfly. It's been such a privilege to be part of that journey.
All right, and so now I'm going to go into the emerging best practices. So as you can see with the success of ed coaching over the last 12 years, there's growing evidence that educational coaching directly supports the success of students with autism or ID. We have also seen students' job opportunities increase, enhancing competitive integrated employment, which is why we wanted to share what we have learned over these years through ed coaching support. We have students completing a variety of certificates. They're completing associate's degree that are transferable to Cal State Long Beach and Fullerton in our area. And so just to see this level of growth and progress and the types of job opportunities that they end up with the appropriate supports that each individual needs that's tailored to them. It's really just changed the pathway for students with disabilities. All right, so another way that we have continued to expand our educational coaching program, because again, each one has a different funding stream and different students qualify depending on where we partner with. And so this new opportunity that's opened up is we're piloting a newly funded Ed Coach pilot project with the Department of Rehab. And the exciting thing about this is who qualifies? All students enrolled in inclusive classes. It doesn't matter whether you're in C2C, whether you're with regional, or what school within the district that you're taking, or what disability you have. So any disability needing Ed Coach support at any one of our campuses, those students now qualify. And that has been our goal for a long time, because it's difficult to say, well, you get Ed coaching, but you don't because of this or that. And so I'm really excited about this project. We're just starting it. The grant was just finalized. We're hiring Ed coaches. We're bringing on new students, but as far as the staff that we were budgeted to also bring in, is we were able to hire 4 new Ed coaches and an Ed Coach coordinator, who are going to help us to training tools and modules for new Ed coaches. We're also collaborating with our district DSS office at our Fullerton College and Cypress College campuses to provide these services. And although these services aren't mandated, which is why we do call it educational supports, it's not a mandated service, because we also have so many staffing and so many appointments. So if appointments or Ed coaches, if we do run out, then we create waiting list. But hopefully that won't be the problem, the way that we're hiring our Ed coaches right now. So some additional ideas of how you can apply for additional funds is Department of Rehab. They do have a reallotment funds, and they're very open to educational coaching, as there's other college to career programs and colleges who are applying to see how they could provide this service, perhaps under Department of Rehab. We'll go into how DSS allocation can be used. Also, if you have SEEP funds, that's another opportunity. And then there's private foundations. And then with our EYES program, we've collaborated with them to provide regional center services. So regional would be another contact if you wanted to create a Taylor Day program, and you could probably find information on that on their website or even reach out to them.
I'll also add that, so you can certainly explore your college becoming a vendor through Regional Center and kind of setting up a Taylor Day program. You can also refer your students who are Regional Center clients, so students on the spectrum and students with intellectual disability should be eligible for Regional Center support, to talk to their Regional Center service coordinator about potentially receiving similar supports of educational coaching on campus. So there are several different organizations across the state that are not affiliated with a particular college, but they are vendored by Regional Center and go to different colleges and provide educational coaching supports to students on those campuses. And I'm hoping to be able to organize a webinar to kind of highlight some of those programs too. But definitely they are available, and those resources, your student may be able to access them, those resources outside and additional supports from regional center that, are going to help set them up for success and, maybe be beyond what your current DSPS office is able to offer in that moment. So definitely something to be aware of, and maybe to build connections with your local regional center and to learn about the services as you're referring students potentially there. And I'll also mention, so DDS, the Department of Developmental Services, which oversees the regional centers, they also have some funding opportunities that come out on a regular basis that might be eligible, for, or educational coaching might be eligible for if your college wanted to apply for additional funding in that way. I'll say that in addition to kind of thinking about applying an educational coaching program at your college, if that feels like a lot to do in this moment, there's also ways to, break it down or to make it more cost efficient, or while still providing a lot of support. So in terms of the educational coaches themselves, in the college to career programs, they are paid employees. However, UCLA Pathway, which is our inclusive post-secondary education program through UCLA Extension, we have educational coaches. They are UCLA undergrads who are volunteering with our program. And so that is a way to kind of keep those costs down. And, they serve as peer mentors or provided some training and regular kind of supports as they are working with students, but are ultimately volunteering their time. It's also possible to think about or explore establishing relationships with local programs like counseling programs that might you might be able to establish a practicum placement at your college. Again, that would be a low-cost way to have educational coaching. And then another option to think about is also breaking down the role to potentially be able to offer elements to students. So last year in one of our webinars, we heard from Fresno City College, who has a wonderful kind of transition to college program. One thing that they do is they have recorded a peer mentor who recorded themselves going through their campus website and navigating it and talking through all the different resources and how to get to this. And I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. Hold on, let's see. Okay. So they navigated, they recorded kind of how to navigate the different websites and having that available to students with disabilities in kind of plain language and clear step-by-step process. You could also think about offering kind of social skills groups or student social opportunities with your DSPS staff present to kind of support the social functioning, or workshops focused on self-advocacy or focused on study strategies that are open to any student or students with disabilities. So again, these types of supports, you can think about ways to offer elements if, beginning the educational coaching program feels like a big step at this time. So I'm going to pass it to the Chancellor's office, to Mia and Jenny, to talk about exciting kind of ways to use funding for this.
Hi, everyone. So we're excited at the California Community College's Chancellor's office to share that educational coaching is an allowable DSPS expense, so you can use those DSPS allocation funds for educational coaching for students who are enrolled in DSPS. And of course, that it's determined that ed coaching is an accommodation that would support that student. Like was mentioned earlier, this is kind of a local decision. It's not mandated. So colleges are not required to provide educational coaching. So it's just another great opportunity to support students with disabilities as an accommodation. using the interactive process is really how we would determine that educational coaching would be a support to those students to access educational curriculum, help support them on campus and their life there with their educational goals. So again, if your college has the money available and you have a student that would really benefit from the support that educational coaching provides, we highly recommend going for it. It's such a great resource. And as previously mentioned too, if you don't have enough DSPS funds to support educational coaching, there are other ways to go about supporting those students who would really benefit from it. So again, this isn't something that's mandated. Colleges at the California community colleges are not required to provide this, but it's such a great opportunity to support those students with disabilities. So Mia, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Anything I missed?
Yeah, I wanted to address one question that received in the Q&A about if our colleges could offer educational coaching and educational assistance classes. And I don't feel that that would be appropriate. Our regulations and guidelines say that educational assistance classes must be primarily instructional in nature and not to provide, services or activities. So I would not advocate doing this in an EAC. This could be something though that you're supplementing perhaps with your college effort dollars, so that you can have that, contribute to future allocation percentages. So I think this is a spot where you need to get creative with your college, and of course would depend on, your available budget.
And I'll add too, that in that interactive process, as you all are, if you are moving forward with educational coaching, as we hope that this service our support service does become more widely available, and trying to identify what are the educational limitations that might link to or support the a referral for educational coaching. So things like executive functioning difficulties, things like social communication challenges or differences, cognitive delays or deficits would all be tied to some of those specific supports that educational coaching provides, related to organization and self-advocacy, social skills, accessing resources. Yeah. Okay, so anything else from Mia and Jenny before we keep moving to questions? Okay, so first,
the only other thing I saw in the Q&A, and I know we're going to address them later, but I did see some questions about minimum qualifications around hiring. So those have not been established in regulations. So maybe when we get to Q&A, Rachel and April can talk about their hiring process.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great questions in the Q&A. So excited to dive into some of those. So before we get there, though, just want to say thank you so much to the California Department of Rehabilitation, who funds the college to career programs, as well as the Chancellor's office for being part of today's webinar and really opening the door for educational coaching potentially to be available on more campuses. Also want to thank you to all our network of college to career programs who supported the presentation. So North Orange and San Diego, who are with us today, but all of our other programs who also contributed to that data that I presented before. So we will go to questions now. Before we move into questions, I'm going to quickly put in the chat a link to our survey for this webinar. I would love for all of you in attendance today to please fill out the survey at the end of our Q&A. It really helps us to inform our ongoing webinars and refine what we're providing to you all. Okay, so let's dive into some of the questions here. So I'll start with that question that Mia mentioned. So what are the hiring requirements? And, including, are they full-time? Who are the educational coaches that you're hiring? And I'll pass this to Rachel and April. what are the qualifications or experiences that they've had previously?
Okay, so for our hiring, a lot of our ed coaches at the beginning, they kind of grew up in our department. They started off as a classroom aide. They got exposed to working with individuals with disabilities, and they're often working on a degree. So that was one. That's how we really got started off. But as we're really growing the program and increasing our ed coaching staff to probably like 9 or 10 ed coaches, and the way that I advertise it and what I have learned, I'm still learning this myself, but what I have learned, when I advertise the position, usually the ones that haven't worked in our program, if they have either experience working with students with disabilities, or if they have a degree like in human services, vocational rehab, psychology, something that addresses working with students in those areas, those applicants tend to be the ones that interview well, and we're able to train them. If they don't know, if they haven't worked with students with disabilities, that's something we can train and expose them to in our program. But if we can find someone with somewhat of an educational foundation within like psychology and health science, we find that those are good applicants.
Yeah, and for us here at San Diego, we're actually very spoiled because we have a rehab counseling program at San Diego State University that we're very strongly connected to. I'm actually a former graduate myself, and so that relationship is very strong. And we are able to host an internship for the students in the RCP through our educational coach position. What's really great is that, it's a paid position. A lot of internships may not be paid. And so it's a great way to host an internship and get, qualified candidates that have an interest in serving individuals with disabilities, may have some background in doing so as well. So that's been really beneficial for us.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. And I'm seeing there's a lot of other questions about hiring. So while we're on this trend here. So what recruitment practices have you found to be successful? Are they hourly? And I think you've already answered, whether you're pulling from internal or external, but, just continuing to draw on those.
Yeah. Let's see. I would say, what was the first part of the question?
Recruitment, hourly or like a full-time, part-time, and then whether you're recruiting internally or externally.
Yeah, so our hourlies or our ed coaches are hourlies. They're part-time. They pretty much work through the academic year because that's when students need ed coaching. And they can't work more than 26 hours, but sometimes we'll get an ed coach. Our ed coaches are often students. So they may have their own personal classes on Tuesday, Thursday, and then they're available Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So it's not as though our ed coaches tend to be available full time. It is a future goal as this continues to be an emerging practice to where it would be ideal to create a permanent position. But right now, just because it's something that's still being explored and implemented, we're not at the point to where we're hiring full-time educational coaches, but I definitely see it in the future.
Yeah, and similarly for us, our ed coaches are part-time. Many of them, again, are college students, so they prefer that flexibility in their schedule. And then our ed coaches are classified under our NANCE positions, which is a non-academic, non-classroom position. So their contracts are renewed every year based on the program need.
Great, thank you. And so I'm hoping that answers, the several people's questions. And I will highlight too, I mentioned this earlier, but in terms of there are different models of educational coaching. And so at UCLA and our UCLA Pathway program, our ed coaches are student volunteers. So UCLA undergrads who are volunteering. Often they're, interested in the allied health disciplines or are doing disability studies, which we have a minor in disability studies here at UCLA. So they're really looking to get experience with those populations. All right, so let's see. Let's see. So do your educational coaches go into the classroom with students, or are they supporting outside of class time only? I guess this would go to April and Rachel too.
Yeah.
so-
Oh, go ahead.
So before the pandemic, when it came to our non-credit classes, they were allowed to go into the classroom, especially if an individual had difficulty staying on task and needed just to help stay focused. That was really beneficial to some students. The credit side, that wasn't permittable because then you need to either be auditing the class, but then sometimes we would have a student in like an automotive class and they knew having someone in that class with one of our students would be beneficial for them. So it's also building those relationships and partnerships with the departments that your students are enrolling in, and just, definitely making those connections so that they better understand your program and our students. And oftentimes they just want to learn how to better support them as well.
Yeah, for us in San Diego, we can only authorize ed coaching for each student for up to 1 to 2 hours per week. So in the grand scheme of the students' week, that's pretty limited. And so we feel that it's best if we meet with students outside of class. We also like to kind of separate ourselves from a tailored day professional and from an aide. And we feel that our support is best utilized outside of class, working on whatever the student needs.
Yeah.
And none of our ed coaching is being offered in the campus, just so you know. That was really something that worked before the pandemic, but it doesn't seem to be that strong of a need right now.
Yeah, and I would agree, from my understanding of educational coaching, not only within the college to career programs in our state, but also more broadly, that it is something that's offered outside of class and is distinct from, someone who might need kind of in-class support. It's, a distinct type of service. This is offering to help organization and problem solving, self-advocacy, social skills. All right, let's see. So several people are asking about how we might know if a college is offering this service, or how they can request this service if they, as they're looking at colleges.
Well, first of all, those who may qualify if they have an intellectual disability or on the spectrum with the goal of getting a job within 3 years, like any of the colleges that were mentioned before, can receive ed coaching supports under those programs. And then I know here at North Orange Community College District, it's available. And so I'm not too sure where else outside of that.
I would say that the regional center would be another resource. I know that Taylor Day, a lot of our students utilize Taylor Day support through the regional center, and their Taylor Day staff are able to help with some educational assistance. So we do rely on their support at times because, again, we're only able to authorize up to 2 hours a week. And so really that's not a lot of time. The student may need more. And so we really do work with the Taylor Day to kind of help with whatever was unfinished or helping the student pick up where we left off at our last session. So it's been a great added support for our students.
And I think that, if you're interested in, if you're looking at a college and you're interested in knowing if this is available, I think talking to the DSPS office, or sometimes there's different names for that office, it could be DSS, or it could be Office of Students with Disabilities, OSD, there could be different names, but every college will have some kind of office that serves students with disabilities. And you can ask if they offer educational coaching. And I also want to just be clear for any, families and self-advocates who might be present, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that sometimes this same type of service is called different things because it's a very new type of support service or practice. So you may also want to kind of I mentioned some of the other terms that are used sometimes around the country, peer mentoring sometimes can encompass some of these educational coaching skills or strategies and supports. Sometimes peer mentoring programs are a little less intensive or not focused as much on the academics and more focused on the social pieces. So if there is peer mentoring, learning about what that looks like, what that means. And then academic coaching is another term that's sometimes used, but really kind of speaking to kind of what you're looking for and seeing if there might be something available either through the DSPS office or that they could refer you to, like regional center. Okay. All right, let's see. I'm seeing. How do you support students whose first language is not English? Is that something that you've encountered, April and Rachel?
I would say, well, so we don't support students in our ESL classes. They utilize those resources. But if it's educational coaching, they would really need, if they're, yeah, they would need to at least be able to speak English in order to communicate with their ed coach. But at this time, we currently don't support ESL students in those classes.
Yeah, we also haven't had any students that were specifically in ESL. They may have happened to have another language before English, but most of the students we've served have been proficient enough to be successful in classes and not have any issues. So don't have a ton of experience with that, unfortunately.
We see a question here. Are other community colleges aware of educational coaching? What is their level of interest in to start programs at their campuses or challenges that they're encountering? And so our goal in this webinar is to increase awareness of educational coaching across the California community college system and broader. And, we gave a similar presentation at a conference at CAPED, the California Association for Post-Secondary Education and Disability, in October. And there was a lot of interest and a lot of enthusiasm. And I can see from all the questions that there's still lots of interest and enthusiasm. So we're really hoping to that, as more awareness increases, that there will be more access. I think one of the biggest challenges is probably funding and logistics, which is why we're so happy to have Jenny and Mia here speaking that it is an allowable expense and kind of talking about different ways that the California community college system might be able to implement it more, since we know many of these students start out in community colleges. I don't know, Jenny, if you wanted to add anything on that.
Yeah, so I think too that there's been, ever since there was the presentation at CAPED, it's been something that's been talked about a lot more. There's a lot of excitement around it through our DSPS directors at the community colleges. So I do think they're more aware of it now, which is wonderful. And I know I've received a lot of questions about it. I plan on reiterating in our, we have directors meetings every quarter. So I plan on reiterating that with them in those meetings, sharing this webinar once it's recorded and sent to our listservs for the DSPS directors, but really continuing to spread the word. And in regards to California community colleges with DSPS, a student, like we had mentioned earlier, would need to have that verifiable disability and go through that interactive process with the DSPS office to identify that educational coaching would be really supportive for that student. So it's not something necessarily that all colleges are going to be able to offer to every single student with a disability, especially thinking funding. But it is something that is so great and such a useful support for so many students. So highly recommend spreading the word everywhere as much as you can.
Absolutely. And that touched on another question too. So, a few people are asking about, eligibility. Do you need a diagnosis? Do you need to be in a certain program? And so right now it's being offered in the college to career programs, which are at those 8 community colleges throughout California. And the eligibility related to that is having a diagnosis of intellectual disability or autism. However, we are working, and some colleges like North Orange are expanding educational coaching beyond the college to career program to a broader population of students with disabilities. Like Jenny mentioned, there would need to be a verifiable documentation of disability, as well as educational limitation that would be kind of or justify a referral for education coaching. So I mentioned before, but things like executive functioning challenges, social communication differences, cognitive deficits, those would all be kind of educational limitations that are addressed or further supported by educational coaching to allow students to access the curriculum. And there are other programs, like I mentioned UCLA Pathway, that's an inclusive post-secondary program, and we offer educational coaching. And someone put in the Q&A, Think College. So Think College is a national kind of coordinating center for inclusive post-secondary education programs and for students with intellectual disabilities. And so they have a list on their website of a bunch of inclusive post-secondary programs across the nation for this population. And so we can learn more there. They also have a ton of amazing resources about serving students with intellectual disability on their website, Think College. All right. Let's see. Someone's asking about whether the training materials used to train coaches could be shared. If anyone has particular, more specific questions like that, they can reach out to me and I can coordinate with our college to career programs to see what we're able to share. And then let's see, a few people are asking about some of the specific regional center vendored programs that were mentioned, if we have particular ones that we know of that offer educational program coaching. So some that I'm aware of, so Tierra del Sol down here in like the Valley near Los Angeles, College Connect, I think is kind of in east of LA, the Edge program, I think Ability First might have one. There's several, and I don't know them all. I will say that, but they are vendored through regional center, and so Tierra del Sol, for example, I know they work with I think like 3 or 4 community colleges as well as a Cal State, and they can serve individuals enrolled in any of those colleges, and so they are not affiliated with a particular college, but they're vendored by the regional center. And so if you have a student who's a regional center client, I would recommend, and if you think that they could benefit from ed coaching and your college doesn't currently have ed coaching, definitely mention that they can talk to their service coordinator to see if there's supports available, because every every regional center, so there's 21 regional centers in the state, and they all might have different organizations that they're vendored with. Some might have multiple, so definitely something to explore. Okay. All right. There's a lot of specific, so let's see. If my son attends this the college without an educational program, can he get support from self-determination program of regional center? I would definitely inquire. I definitely think with the self-determination program, you would be able to hire like an educational coach, almost like a private pay. I'm not sure exactly what the title would be, but like that, I see April and Rachel are nodding. But this, I know through the self-determination program, you're able to kind of hire your own workers. And so you could kind of hire and have funds to do that. So you could definitely explore hiring an ed coach that way if you're in the self-determination program. I don't know if Rachel and April, if you have any additional things to add on that. Okay. I'll probably do one or two more questions. So are community college students with mental health diagnoses who may have similar underlying needs be eligible for educational coaching services? So April, have you?
Well, it all so it depends on the programs and the funding that you have. Like under C2C, that's strictly for intellectual disabilities and autism. Whereas like since we have a DOR educational coach, we can address all that, you know, but not all educational coaching is not necessarily geared towards mental health. It just depends on what funding stream it's coming from, what organization, so that determines how a student qualifies.
For the community colleges too, if a student is in DSPS with a mental health diagnosis, and through that interactive process, they determine that, yes, this is something that would be really beneficial for the student as an accommodation, and they have the funds and the ability to do it, they can choose to go that route. But again, it's not a required piece as of right now. So, you know, we wouldn't be able to say for sure that a college will be able to do it in the California community colleges, but it's something that we recommend if it's for a student that would really benefit from it with that verified disability.
Yeah, and you know, I'll underscore that you know, again, it's not a mandated service, and so this is something that we're hoping will become more available to really support student success, but is not legally, you know, required for any college to provide. You know, maybe in the future, you know, if laws change, you know, we can all be advocating, and especially as more and more data kind of collects around the efficacy of this. Let's see. Okay, so already answered. So I'm just going through the ones that I've already answered and click them out yet.
There was a question from someone wanting to get more information about the DOR grant that April mentioned.
Oh yeah.
Oh, the reallotment funds. I don't know, Christine, you could probably send out the information on that, right? On how they can go about applying for reallotment funds, because I don't know if they're still accepting applications or not, but I'm pretty sure they are.
Yeah, if anyone's particularly interested in that, please reach out to me and I can connect you to DOR. There's not a formal like announcement for this particular funding opportunity. I'm also seeing that someone is mentioning that using a practicum model to have educational coaches is great. So someone mentioned that then when they worked at a community college, they recruited human services majors from a local Cal State, and they did a form of educational coaching. So the human services major interns received training and got the experience working with disabilities, and the students with disabilities benefited. So win-win. And that reminds me, Jenny, maybe you could speak in our last 2 minutes about how we see it as a win-win for the community colleges as well.
Definitely. So with the student-centered funding formula, the more success students have, higher graduation rates and so on, increases the funding that colleges have or receive. So really supporting these students to be as successful as possible through educational coaching can, in the long run, even though you're spending money to support that, it could increase your funding for your college. So it could end up being a win-win, honestly, overall. So it supports students, it's good for the colleges. So it's, like you said, a win-win all around.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to end us there. And I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat one more time our survey for feedback on this webinar. We really appreciate you taking the time in the last 3 minutes before 3:30 to fill out that survey. It's super fast, just a few questions. It's really helpful for us at the Tarjan Center as we continue to design programming and webinars for the community college system. And we really appreciate your time and interest and attention and all of the questions. There's so many questions that we are so thrilled, and we hope that there will be more interest. If anyone has any particular questions or follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat as well if you didn't grab it from the last slide. And I can direct you either to one of our speakers or share any information that I have. So thank you again, everybody. We really appreciated the time to share about educational coaching. Thank you to our speakers, to Rachel, April, Jenny, and Mia. We are so excited about the idea of educational coaching expanding. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.